Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. You know, when we look at the global landscape of football, certain nations just have these undeniable mythological identities. Brazil, they dance with flair. Spain, they will literally pass you to death. Germany overwhelms you with sheer, relentless efficiency. But today, we're unpacking a country that took the gritty, bruised, historically unglamorous side of the sport and somehow elevated it into a breathtaking, cinematic masterpiece. We are talking about the undisputed masters of the backline, a nation that forged a defensive identity so incredibly powerful it became feared across the entire globe. We're talking, of course, about Italy. Now, this isn't just about parking the bus and hoping for the best. No, it's about an elite tactical heritage passed down through generations, almost like a sacred text. It is the story of how stopping goals actually became a higher calling.
I want to ask you a question right off the bat to really set the stage here. Did you know that while the rest of the world was desperately chasing goals, one country was quietly turning defending into an absolute art form? Think about it for a second. While other teams were sprinting forward, leaving these massive, gaping holes in their wake, Italy was building a defensive cathedral, brick by painstaking brick. In traditional football culture, stopping a goal is almost always seen as an act of desperation, right? It's a last-ditch sliding tackle or a frantic, chaotic clearance into the stands. But not here. In Italy, defending is viewed as the ultimate intellectual puzzle. It is a deliberate, calculated, and deeply beautiful display of tactical mastery. They didn't just happen to produce good center backs by luck. They painstakingly perfected the mold. They created an entire environment where understanding space, geometry, and human psychology is actually valued way above a flashy step-over. For them, a perfectly timed interception, that's just as exhilarating as a 30-yard screaming volley.
Okay, let's dive into this, because the cultural contrast here is absolutely staggering. Look at who gets idolized across the globe. In Brazil, attackers are the ultimate idols. They represent rhythm, flair, and just pure joy on the pitch. In Argentina, forwards are treated as literal mythological legends. In Portugal, wingers are the celebrated free-roaming artists. But in Italy, defenders are absolute royalty. The men who play at the back aren't just the guys who weren't quite fast or skillful enough to play up front. No way. They are the generals. They're the orchestrators, the most respected minds on the field. At Italy's famous Coverciano coaching headquarters, which is basically the legendary University of Italian football, defending isn't just practiced, it is studied like an exact, rigorous science. Young players are taught from day one that defenders are the foundation of any empire. They are revered for their supreme intellect, their leadership, and their unshakable reliability when the pressure is at its absolute highest.
Moving right along to Section 1, the art of defending.
To truly understand the Italian defender, you have to look way past the physical tackles. You have to dive deep into the specific DNA and the psychological mindset that makes them so uniquely fearsome. You know, raw, blistering speed is almost never listed as their greatest asset. Instead, these players are armed with unbelievable tactical intelligence, superb technical ability, unbreakable psychological strength, and most importantly, elite anticipation. A traditional Italian center half commands respect and often sheer terror before a single ball is even kicked. Why is that? Because they rely on positioning so well that they rarely even have to break into a sprint. It's literally like watching a grandmaster playing chess. They do not react to danger, they anticipate it. If an Italian defender has to make a desperate sliding tackle, they honestly often feel like they've already made a positional mistake to get to that point. They shut out the opposition's attacking threats through sheer mental sharpness, mapping out the striker's movements before the striker even knows where they're going themselves.
Let's move to Section 2, Catenaccio, the master blueprint.
You don't build a defensive cathedral overnight, folks. Italy's tactical architecture took decades to forge in the really intense fires of domestic and international competition. Just look at this incredible tactical timeline. Back in the 1930s, visionary manager Vittorio Pozzo pioneered the Methodos system. He tweaked the standard formations of the time by dropping inside forwards deeper to create robust, layered defensive cover. And guess what? This innovation led Italy to back-to-back World Cup glory in 1934 and 1938. Then came the 1960s, bringing a seismic revolution at Inter Milan under the legendary Helenio Herrera. He implemented strict training regimes, quasi-military in their discipline, to perfect the Catenaccio. And here's a fun fact for you. Catenaccio literally translates to door bolt. It was a system explicitly, unapologetically designed to lock down the penalty area and throw away the key. Under Herrera, La Grande Inter used this defensive stranglehold to completely conquer Europe. Now, decades later, Arrigo Sacchi at AC Milan would come along and challenge this deep-sitting status quo with a relentless high press. But the core principle remained exactly the same. Defensive supremacy dictated the terms of the game. The evolution was relentless, constantly demanding the absolute highest level of defensive adroitness.
So how did this famous Catenaccio actually function on the pitch? Well, it was built on 3 relentless pillars. Step 1. Strict, austere man-marking to completely suffocate the opposition's forwards. This wasn't just soft zonal coverage, this was a shadow that followed a striker everywhere, literally to the water break. A man-marker's job was to make the opposing forward regret getting out of bed that morning. Step 2. The deployment of a libero, or sweeper. This was a free, deeper covering defender positioned behind the main defensive line. Their sole job was to read the game, anticipate danger, sweep up absolutely any ball that leaked through the man markers, and provides the ultimate safety net. Step 3. Once the ball was won back, the team launched rapid, incisive, lethal counterattacks. This framework didn't just win football matches, it forged an entire generation of players who viewed defending not as a physical chore, but as a supreme intellectual and psychological skill.
Now for the really fun part. Section 3. Legends of the Backline.
You simply cannot discuss Italian defending without contrasting these 2 iconic, mythological archetypes. On one side, you have the gentleman, Gaetano Scirea, a graceful, composed sweeper who read the game so flawlessly he won every major club trophy and a World Cup without ever receiving a single red card in his entire illustrious career. He was the absolute embodiment of clean, elegant anticipation. Now, on the exact opposite end of the spectrum is the enforcer, Claudio Gentile. He was an intimidating, ruthless man-marker, a mean machine who mastered the absolute dark arts of the game. During the 1982 World Cup, Gentile was tasked with stopping Diego Maradona, who was widely considered the most dangerous player on earth. Gentile fouled Maradona a staggering 23 times in that single match. 23 times! He effectively erased the best player in the world from the pitch. It was a complete masterclass in clean elegance on one side, combined with gritty, do-or-die survival tactics on the other.
And this brilliantly illustrates the Italian mindset, because right after that exact match against Maradona, Claudio Gentile delivered the ultimate mic drop moment in defensive history. He famously told the press, "Football is not for ballerinas." This merciless quote just perfectly encapsulates the terrifying reality of facing an Italian backline. If the situation demanded graceful passing, they could absolutely do it. But if the match demanded dirty work, tactical fouls, leaving a bruise, or hurling the ball into the stands just to survive, they did it without a single moment of hesitation or remorse. They defended their penalty box as if they were fighting for survival on a war front, completely unbothered by complaints from the rest of the world about it being ugly.
Then comes the era that cemented Italy's reputation globally, led by perhaps the greatest defensive player in the history of the sport, Paolo Maldini. He was, quite literally, defensive poetry in motion. Just look at that resume on screen: 7 Serie A titles and 5 European Cups. Before Maldini, fullbacks were mostly just drilled to stop wingers from getting past them. It was a purely reactive role. Maldini changed the position forever. And I have to share a truly mind-bending statistic with you. Over his legendary 25-year career, Paolo Maldini averaged only 0.56 tackles per game. Let that sink in for a second. That is 1 tackle every 2 games. Why? Because his anticipation and positioning were so absolutely flawless, he rarely ever needed to actually go to ground. His reading of the game, his unmatched longevity, and his supreme leadership became the absolute gold standard for how to train a defender anywhere in the world. He was an artist who painted with defensive geometry.
Let's pause right here. The year is 2006. This tournament was the ultimate defining test of the Italian defensive soul. During a grueling World Cup knockout match against Australia, Italy found themselves down to 10 men. But manager Marcello Lippi didn't panic. He simply channeled the ghosts of the Catenaccio era. He switched to a resolute defensive formation, locked things down, and proved that Italian resilience is virtually impossible to break. In fact, to put this into perspective, during that entire 2006 World Cup run, Italy conceded exactly 2 goals. One was an incredibly unlucky own goal, and the other was a penalty kick. That means not a single opponent scored against them in open play for the entire tournament. Think about how insane that is. It was a defensive masterclass of epic proportions.
And that monumental 2006 World Cup triumph was driven by the ultimate defensive warrior, Fabio Cannavaro. He was incredibly dominant, so imposing in his ability to shut down attacks. But here's the fascinating twist about Cannavaro. He is only 5 feet 9 inches tall. That is 1.75 meters, which is incredibly short for a dominant center back. Yet he relied entirely on a superhuman vertical leap and psychic-level anticipation to out-jump and out-muscle strikers who were nearly a foot taller than him.
He didn't just lift the World Cup trophy as captain, his performances were so legendary he actually won the Ballon d'Or. In a footballing world entirely obsessed with flashy goal scores, Cannavaro proved definitively that within the Italian system, a center-back could be crowned the absolute best football player on the planet.
Let's move into the modern era with Section 4, the legendary BBC trio.
So in the modern era, as global football shifted toward higher pressing and a massive demand for ball-playing defenders, many critics wondered if Italy's traditional defensive cathedral would finally crumble. But instead, it was simply reinforced. It gave birth to a modern wall, the legendary BBC trio. This was a perfectly balanced three-man defensive ecosystem that anchored a Juventus side to an undefeated league season and multiple Champions League finals. First, you had Giorgio Chiellini, bringing relentless, rugged aggression, bandaged heads, and old-school physicality. Next to him, you had Leonardo Bonucci, acting almost as a deep-lying playmaker, launching 60-yard pinpoint passes with elite distribution. And gluing the whole shebang together was Andrea Barzagli, providing ultimate tactical balance and covering intelligence. Together, they dominated Serie A for nearly a decade. They proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Italy could master modern, progressive possession football without losing a single ounce of their terrifying, intimidating defensive grit.
Section 5. Evolving the defensive masterpiece.
With the eventual retirements of giants like Chiellini and Bonucci, the cathedral is currently undergoing structural renovations. But make no mistake, the legacy is far from over. A vibrant new generation is rising right now. We're talking about players like Alessandro Bastoni, Gianluca Mancini, Alessandro Buongiorno, and Federico Gatti. Now, these young stars grew up watching Cannavaro lift the World Cup and studying Chiellini's fierce, bloody battles. But they aren't merely carbon copies of the past. They represent the next step in tactical evolution. Today, players like Bastoni are essentially playmakers who just happen to play in defense. They're incredibly comfortable stepping high into the midfield, building attacks progressively from the back under immense pressure. And crucially, modern tactical systems require them to defend one-on-one in 50 yards of massive open space, a terrifying prospect that they handle with absolute ice in their veins. They possess the old-school grit, combined seamlessly with modern, progressive intelligence.
Which brings us to our final chapter, Section 6, the eternal defensive identity.
So we've traced the tactical systems all the way from the 1930s to today. We've examined the mythological players, and we've looked at the striking cultural differences. But it all truly comes back to this fundamental truth. In Italy, clean sheets mean absolute pride. Defending means identity. There is a famous concept coined by the legendary Italian sports journalist Gianni Barrera, who once wrote, "The perfect football match ends 0-0. Think about the profound cultural weight of that statement. To an Italian, a 0-0 draw isn't boring. It is a masterpiece of collective suffering, tactical perfection, and completely neutralized threats. Through the 1980s and 90s, it was a deeply held cultural belief that it was far better to score one beautifully crafted goal and hold a 1-0 lead than to win a messy, chaotic game 4-3. Shutting out the opponent is a sacred achievement. It is the ultimate testament to discipline, tactical superiority, and an unbreakable collective will.
We've seen how this defensive culture was forged in the fires of Catenaccio, tested by the world's greatest attackers, and evolved over a century. It's a gripping, cinematic story of tactical genius and physical warriors. So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to take away. The next time someone tells you that defending is ugly, or boring, or just a desperate scramble to stop a goal, ask them if they've ever studied Italy. Ask them if they've ever seen the cathedral. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the beautiful, brutal art of Italian defending. See you next time.